Welcome to Talk Treatises.
Yeah, it's really good to be back.
We have a session today that I think is, it's going to challenge a lot of assumptions.
Absolutely.
If you are a regular listener, you know the drill here. We take a stack of sources, right? So classic literature, professional philosophy, the heavy hitters of the canon, and we basically treat the text as the primary reality.
Right. We are looking for the architecture of the ideas.
Yeah, exactly. We aren't here to critique the grammar or argue with the margins.
We want to see the world through the author's eyes.
No matter how terrifying that view might be.
And today, the view is definitely terrifying.
It really is. We are walking into a construction site that is also a demolition zone, basically.
That's a great way to put it.
We are doing a deep dive into the source material of Friedrich Nietzsche's The Genealogy of Morals, written in 1887.
A polemic.
Right.
That is what he calls it, right on the title page. A polemic.
And he absolutely means it. I mean, this isn't a dry history of ethics. This is an attack.
A full frontal assault.
Yeah. And I think the best way to frame the intellectual stakes here for you listening is that Nietzsche is coming for everything modern people consider good, moral, and holy.
He's not just asking what is the right thing to do. He's asking where did we get these ideas of good and evil in the first place?
And are they actually killing us?
That is the crux of it right there.
Yeah.
The central question he poses is, under what conditions did man invent the value judgments good and evil? And what value do they possess in themselves?
Because we tend to assume good is, well, just good.
Right. We assume it promotes life. It promotes happiness.
But Nietzsche steps back and asks this incredibly dangerous question. What if good, our specific definition of moral goodness, is actually a symptom of retrogression?
What if it's a danger?
A poison.
Or a narcotic?
A narcotic that prevents man from achieving his maximum potential power and splendor.
That is a very heavy accusation to lay at the feet of morality.
It's like looking at a medicine cabinet and realizing everything inside is actually arsenic.
It is. And to understand why he launches this attack, we really have to look at the context.
So he's writing this in Sils Maria, July of 1887.
Right, and he frames this work as a clarification or an amplification of his previous book, Beyond Good and Evil.
Which is also pretty explosive.
Very. But the intellectual climate he's reacting against here is very specific. He is fighting a two-front war.
Against who exactly?
Well, on one side, the English psychologists, the utilitarians.
Okay.
And on the other side, the prevailing pessimism of thinkers like Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer is the guy who basically said existence is a mistake, right?
Roughly, yes. Schopenhauer believed the will to live is a source of suffering, and the goal was to negate it.
To just stop wanting things.
Basically. Nietzsche is trying to overcome that pessimism, but he's also trying to overcome the English idea that morality is just about what's useful or comfortable.
We are going to unpack all of that. But just to give you a roadmap for this deep dive, this book consists of 3 essays that trace the evolution of moral concepts.
3 very distinct arguments.
Right. So the first essay traces the origin of good and evil versus good and bad.
And the second essay gets into the psychology of guilt conscience. And this is fascinating. The ability to make promises.
Which doesn't sound like a big deal until you see what he does with it.
Exactly.
And the third essay tackles the meaning of ascetic ideals. So poverty, chastity, humility.
And if we had to boil this entire complex work down to a one-sentence thesis, it would be this.
Let's hear it.
Our current morality is not an eternal truth revealed from on high. It is a historical outcome of a slave revolt in values.
A slave revolt.
Born of resentment, which turned healthy instincts inward to create bad conscience and nihilism.
Wow. Okay, so let's jump right into the main analysis. Part 1. The first essay, good and evil, good and bad.
Right.
Nietzsche starts by taking a pretty big swing at these English psychologists.
Yeah.
Who are these guys and why is he so annoyed with them?
So he's referring to thinkers like Paul Ray and Herbert Spencer.
The evolutionary moralists.
Right, the evolutionary moralists of the time. Their argument was essentially that good actions were originally just useful actions.
Like cooperation.
Yes, altruistic things because they helped the community survive.
Okay, makes sense on the surface.
And eventually, according to them, people forgot the origin, the utility, but kept the habit of calling these actions good.
So good is just useful with a case of historical amnesia.
Essentially. And Nietzsche says this is historically and psychologically nonsense.
He really doesn't pull his punches.
No, he says they are looking in the completely wrong place.
Because the judgment good didn't originate with the people who were helped.
Exactly. It did not originate with the beneficiaries of the action. It originated with the noble, the powerful, the high-stationed, and the high-minded.
The masters.
The masters. The aristocrats.
They felt themselves to be good.
Yes. They felt their actions, their happiness, their power to be of the first order. They created the value good out of a feeling of superiority over the low-minded, the vulgar, the plebeian.
Nietzsche calls this the pathos of distance.
The pathos of distance.
Right. I love that phrase. It suggests that values aren't these objective things floating in the ether.
No, they are created.
Created by people looking down from a height.
Exactly. Values are created by the ruling caste to affirm themselves. And Nietzsche brings receipts for this too. He uses etymology as proof.
The history of words.
Right. He points out that in various languages, the words for good almost always trace back to roots, meaning noble or aristocratic or spiritually high-minded.
And on the flip side,
conversely, the words for bad trace back to simple common plebeian or even dark-skinned in some contexts.
So originally good didn't mean nice or charitable at all.
Well, not at all. It meant noble or warrior-like.
And bad didn't mean sinful.
No, it just meant common or lowly.
That is such a crucial distinction. The difference between good and bad as opposed to good and evil.
It's a distinction of caste. Bad is just a description of something that isn't excellent.
It's not a moral condemnation involving hellfire. It's just a shrug.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that person is bad, meaning they're common, they're boring, they are weak.
Right. But then Nietzsche introduces a complication to this dynamic.
He talks about two different types of aristocracies.
Yes, the knightly aristocratic and the priestly aristocratic.
Right, so the knightly values are based on powerful physicality, robust health, war, adventure hunting, dancing tourneys.
It's a value system based on strong, free, joyous action. They are the beasts of prey, as Nietzsche sometimes calls them.
Because they discharge their energy outwardly.
Exactly, but then you have the priests.
The priestly aristocracy is different. They're also a ruling caste, but they aren't physically strong.
Right. And because they are physically weaker than the knights, they develop a different set of tools. They develop a spiritual nature.
And because they can't fight with swords, they develop something else.
A dangerous hatred.
Nietzsche seems to have a very complicated relationship with the priests in this text. I mean, on one hand, he calls them the worst enemies because they are the most evil haters.
He does.
But he also admits that without priests, the human animal would be just another boring beast. The priests made us interesting.
That's a key point. The priests introduce depth. They introduce the concepts of clean and unclean, which eventually morph into moral concepts.
Right.
But the crucial moment in history, according to the text, is the conflict between the knightly values and the priestly values.
And this leads us to the slave revolt in Morals.
Yes.
This is the part where Nietzsche gets very specific about historical catalysts. The text identifies the Jewish people of the ancient world as the primary agents of this revolt.
He does, and we must be precise about his argument here. He posits that the Jews, faced with the overwhelming military power of their conquerors, the Babylonians, the Romans, could not fight back on the physical plane.
They couldn't win by knightly values.
Exactly. So out of what he calls sublime hatred and spiritual profundity, they inverted the value equation.
You flip the table. They completely changed the definitions of the words.
Completely. The aristocratic equation was good equals noble, powerful, beautiful, happy, beloved of the gods.
And the slave revolt inverted this to the good are the poor, the weak, the lowly, the suffering.
And the powerful.
They are now the evil, the cruel, the lustful, the damned.
This is the shift from good and bad to good and evil.
Because evil is a new invention here.
Precisely. Bad was just an afterthought for the noble man. Oh, that commoner over there is bad because he's not like me.
But evil is different.
Evil is the creative invention of the slave mentality. It is the target of their hatred. It is the knight seen through the eyes of the priest.
And this brings us to that central psychological mechanic in the text. Resentment, or as Nietzsche uses the French term, ressentiment.
Right.
Why the French? Why does he use that specific word?
Because ressentiment captures a nuance that resentment doesn't quite get. It implies a re-feeling, a reliving of the injury.
Like chewing on it.
Yes. Master morality is spontaneous. It says yes to itself first. It's self-affirming.
And slave morality.
Slave morality is reactive. It says no to what is outside, what is different, what is not itself. It requires an external enemy to exist.
It literally needs a villain so it can feel like a hero.
Correct. It is born of the inability to take immediate physical revenge. If a knight is insulted, she strikes back, and then the matter is over.
He digests the insult and moves on.
The weak cannot strike back. So the injury festers. It turns into imaginary revenge.
Imaginary revenge. That is such a powerful concept. Nietzsche uses that famous analogy of the birds of prey and the lambs to explain this. I think this really clarifies the difference in perspective for the listener.
It's a brilliant analogy. The lambs naturally dislike the great birds of prey who carry them off.
Of course they do.
So the lambs say among themselves, these birds of prey are evil. And if they are evil, then whoever is the opposite of a bird of prey, whoever is a lamb, must be good.
And the birds of prey are just looking down, confused by this whole conversation.
The birds of prey look down and say, we don't bear any grudge against these good lambs. In fact, we love them. Nothing is tastier than a tender lamb.
It's funny, but it exposes a logical fallacy that Nietzsche is obsessed with. The lambs demand that the bird of prey not act like a bird of prey.
Right. They assume the bird has a choice to be strong or weak.
This is the doer behind the deed fallacy.
Yes. Nietzsche argues that there is no subject or soul behind the action that is free to choose. The strength is the expression of strength.
You can't separate the lightning from the flash.
Exactly. To demand that strength not express itself as a will to overpower is as absurd as demanding that weakness express itself as strength.
But the slave morality invents this subject, this neutral soul, so that it can interpret its own weakness as a voluntary achievement.
Right. It's not that I can't take revenge, it's that I choose not to because I'm good and forgiving.
It's a massive cope, to use modern internet slang.
It really is. Nietzsche takes us into what he calls the dark workshop, where these ideals are manufactured.
Let's talk about that workshop. He shows us how weakness is basically rebranded as merit.
Impotence becomes goodness.
Submission to a hated master becomes obedience to God.
Cowardice becomes patience.
Misery becomes a sign of being chosen or tested.
It's a full-scale rebranding campaign. And it creates a culture where everyone is essentially lying to themselves about their own motives.
And they are waiting for a judgment day, where they finally get their revenge on the strong, but they call it the triumph of justice.
It's a very bleak view of human motives.
Very. So that's the first essay. We move from a morality of good and bad, which is honest and life-affirming, to a morality of good and evil, which is reactive and resentful.
Yes.
Now, the second essay takes a pivot. It's titled Guilt, Bad Conscience, and the Like.
This essay is darker, if that's even possible. It deals with how the human animal was made calculable.
Nietzsche starts with this idea of the promise. He says the defining task of nature regarding man is to breed an animal that is permitted to make promises.
Which implies that man was not originally an animal that could promise.
Right.
To make a promise, you need a memory. You need to be able to hold a will across time. I will do this in the future.
But Nietzsche says the primal human faculty is actually forgetfulness.
Yes. Forgetfulness isn't just a failure of memory. It's a positive active faculty.
A feature, not a bug.
Exactly. It's a doorkeeper that keeps our psychic order. It shuts out the noise so we can function in the present.
So if forgetfulness is natural and healthy, how do you force a memory into a human being? How do you make them remember a promise?
Pain.
Pain.
Nietzsche calls it the mnemotechnics of pain. He says something is burnt in his memory enough so as to remain in his memory. Only that which never stops hurting remains in his memory.
And he goes through this laundry list of historical horrors to prove his point. Stoning breaking on the wheel, quartering boiling in oil.
He's not just doing this for shock value either.
No, he's arguing that these horrors were functionally necessary.
Yes, to make man calculable, to make him rational, to make him follow rules and keep promises. Civilization had to burn the I will not into his instincts using terror.
So our rationality is built on a foundation of blood.
According to Nietzsche, yes. And this leads him directly to the origin of guilt.
Right, let's get into the linguistics again. In German, the word for guilt is Schuld.
And the word for debt is Schulden.
So Nietzsche argues that the moral concept of guilt actually has its origins in the very material economic concept of debt.
It's the creditor-debtor relationship.
The oldest personal relationship in existence.
Right.
Man measuring himself against man.
Right. If you owe a debt and you can't pay it, you have to offer a substitute.
You pledge something you possess, your body, your wife, your freedom, or even your life.
But how does pain pay off a debt?
Yeah, that's the part that is really counterintuitive. If I owe you money and I'll let you cut off my finger, you still don't have the money.
That is the crucial insight. Why is suffering an equivalent for debt? Because Nietzsche argues the creditor gets the pleasure of inflicting pain.
Wow.
It is the festival of cruelty. By punishing the debtor, the creditor participates in the rights of the masters. He gets to look down on and despise the debtor. He gets a taste of power.
That is extremely grim. But he says this was just the norm for ancient man. Cruelty wasn't a problem to be solved, it was entertainment.
He says ancient man found festivals incomplete without cruelty. Executions, tortures, these were public spectacles. Suffering was an enchantment, a seduction to life. We moderns are the ones who have become squeamish and hypocritical about it.
So justice itself originates in this barter system. Everything has its price. Everything can be paid for.
Yes. Justice is just the goodwill among equals to come to terms.
And law.
Law is imposed by the strong to put an end to the pointless rage of resentment. It takes the feeling of injury out of the hands of the individual and standardizes the equivalents, the punishments.
He also makes this really interesting point that as a community becomes stronger, it actually punishes less.
Right. Mercy or grace is the privilege of the most powerful.
Because they can afford it.
Exactly. If you are rich enough, you can afford to let the debtor go. A society that is terrified for its survival punishes harshly. A society that feels supreme power can afford to be lenient. The injury doesn't threaten its existence anymore.
That makes a lot of sense. Now we get to the bad conscience. If punishment makes us tame, where does this inner voice of guilt come from?
Nietzsche says the bad conscience is the result of the most fundamental change man ever underwent.
The enclosure within the walls of society and peace.
The state.
But the state wasn't a contract right.
No, Nietzsche completely dismisses the social contract theory. He says the state was founded by a pack of blonde beasts, a conqueror race, imposing form on a shapeless population.
Just rolling in and taking over.
Yes. Suddenly, these semi-animals found themselves enclosed. All their natural instincts, hunting, cruelty, hostility, destruction, were suppressed. They could no longer discharge them outwardly.
So they turned them inwardly.
Exactly. All instincts that do not discharge themselves outwardly turn inward.
This is the internalization of man.
This is the origin of the soul.
Man began to torture himself because he couldn't torture others.
He became a torture chamber, a war against himself. That is the bad conscience.
And this internal torture chamber gets hooked up to religion.
It connects back to the concept of debt.
Right. Primitive tribes felt a debt to their ancestors for their very existence. Sacrifices were payments.
And as the tribe became more powerful, the fear of the ancestor grew. Eventually, the ancestor becomes a god.
And the debt becomes overwhelming.
And then comes Christianity.
Nietzsche calls Christianity a stroke of genius in this regard.
Because it maximizes the debt. It creates a debt to God that is infinite and unpayable. Eternal punishment.
And then there's the paradox of the cross.
The creditor playing scapegoat for the debtor. God sacrificing himself for the guilt of man. Paying himself out of love.
It's an insane logic, but it locked the human soul into a permanent state of self-torture.
Man projects his bad conscience, his self-torture, onto the concept of God finding himself guilty beyond redemption. He views his natural instincts as sins against the absolute.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
So we have resentment creating our values and internalized cruelty creating our conscience. Now the third essay asks, what is the meaning of ascetic ideals?
This is where he brings it all together. Ascetic ideals are things like poverty, chastity, humility, basically the denial of life.
Why would anyone want that?
He looks at artists first. He brings up Richard Wagner.
He does. He discusses Wagner's Parsifal, which was a tribute to chastity. Nietzsche asks, essentially, what is up with that?
He concludes that for artists, asceticism usually means nothing, or too many things. It's a pose.
Or in Wagner's case, a collapse in old age. A desperate attempt to find redemption at the end of his life that completely contradicted his earlier work.
But for philosophers, it's different.
Right. He looks at Schopenhauer.
For philosophers like Schopenhauer, the ascetic ideal is actually useful. It's an optimum condition for the highest intellectualism.
If you want to do high-level conceptual work, you need freedom from compulsion, freedom from noise, freedom from sexual distraction.
So the philosopher smiles at asceticism because it helps him get his work done. He's not denying life, he's affirming his life as a thinker. It releases him from the torture of the will.
Okay, so the artist is posing, the philosopher is using it as a tool, but then we get to the real representative of the ideal.
The ascetic priest.
For the priest, asceticism isn't just a tool, it is his reality, it is his power, it is his license to exist.
The priest treats life as a wrong road, or a mistake to be refuted. He is a denier of life.
But here's the paradox, right? This denial is actually a will to power.
Yes, the will for contradiction and unnaturalness is still a will. It is life struggling against itself to preserve itself. The priest is the shepherd of the sick herd.
Let's talk about this sick herd. That's a very evocative phrase.
Nietzsche posits that the majority of mortals are physiological failures. They are sick with nausea and disgust for life. They are suffering.
And the sick are the greatest danger to the healthy.
Not the beasts of prey.
Right. You would think the strong predators are the danger.
No, the beasts of prey can kill you, but they don't corrupt you. The sick corrupt the strong. They infect them with misery, pity, and bad conscience.
They try to make the strong feel guilty for being happy. They say, look at us, we are suffering. How dare you be happy?
So the ascetic priest steps in to manage this mass of suffering people.
He defends the herd, but he also poisons them.
He alters the direction of their resentment. When the suffering man says, I suffer, someone must be to blame. The priest says you are right, someone is to blame, but it is you yourself.
He turns the resentment back onto the sufferer. It's your fault. You are a sinner.
And this renders the sick harmless. It keeps them busy with self-discipline and self-flagellation instead of rioting or attacking the healthy. It's a mechanism of rule.
The text mentions the ways the priest alleviates this pain, though. It's not a cure, is it?
No, it's just symptom management. Nietzsche lists the methods. Hypnotism, which is weakening the life force to a state of hibernation, like in some Indian philosophy.
Then there is mechanical activity.
The blessing of work to distract the mind. Just keep moving, keep working so you don't think about the pain.
And the orgy of feeling.
Using emotional excess, guilt, sin, and repentance to drown out the dull pain of existence.
It's like getting drunk on emotion to forget you have a headache.
Exactly. But it ruins the nervous system in the long run.
Now here is the twist that really surprised me. Nietzsche turns his guns on modern science.
This is brilliant.
We usually think of science as the opposite of the ascetic ideal. The scientist versus the priest. But Nietzsche says no, they are on the exact same team.
This is one of his most profound insights. He argues that science is the latest and noblest form of the ascetic ideal.
Why? How does he justify that?
Because science still believes in truth as a divine, unquestionable value. It has a will to truth.
And that will to truth refuses to allow interpretation or illusion.
But Nietzsche argues that life requires illusion. Life requires perspective. By stripping away all illusion in the name of absolute truth, science is actually hostile to life. It leads to the abyss.
So even the atheists, the free thinkers, they're just priests and lab totes because they worship the truth.
They are idealists of knowledge. They have denied God, but they still worship the will to truth. They haven't asked the question, what is the value of the will to truth?
So where does this leave us? The book ends on a pretty ominous note.
It ends with the inevitable conclusion of this logic. Christianity as a dogma was destroyed by its own morality. The requirement of truthfulness eventually debunked the myths.
Right, the church pushed for truth, and eventually science, which came from that push, disproved the church.
Now, Christian morality itself must be destroyed by the same will to truth. We have to look at morality and admit it's a fabrication.
And if we don't, or rather, what happens when we do?
Nihilism. If we destroy the ascetic ideal without replacing it, we are left with nothing. But Nietzsche says man would rather will nothingness than not will at all.
That is quite the cliffhanger. But he does offer a glimmer of hope in the section on peoples and countries and the legacy. He talks about men of the future.
He speaks of redeemers who can free the will and restore the earth. He mentions the Antichrist and anti-nihilists.
He briefly mentions the figure of Zarathustra as the one to whom this domain belongs.
He is looking for a new type of human who is strong enough to create their own values.
He also has some spicy takes on national characters in that fragment, peoples and countries.
He does indeed. He calls the Germans Mephistophelian, complex, contradictory, dangerous.
And the Jews.
He praises the Jews for their vital energy, noting they chose the slave revolt only as a survival strategy, showing how strong they actually were to pull it off.
And he looks at Europe as a whole and sees mediocrization.
The democratization of Europe is making man into a herd animal, a tame animal. The fate of Europe is that its strongest sons are destroyed by the illness of the epoch.
We are tired of man, he says. That's the feeling of nihilism.
Yes. The danger is that we are breeding a small, comfortable, safe last man who takes no risks and has no great passions.
Wow. Okay, that is the landscape of the genealogy of morals. It's a massive inversion of everything we are taught to believe.
It forces you to look at goodness and ask, is this strength or is this just fear dressed up as virtue?
And that brings us to our favorite part of the show.
The thought experiments.
Disclaimer time. The following segment is for entertainment and educational purposes only. These are hypothetical scenarios designed to test the philosophical framework we just discussed. We aren't suggesting you go out and do this.
Please don't. Nietzsche is high voltage stuff. Handle with care.
All right, thought experiment number 1. Let's call this the guilt-free economy.
I like the sound of that.
So Nietzsche argues that guilt comes from the creditor-debtor relationship, specifically the pleasure of inflicting pain to balance the books. So let's imagine a future society, maybe 50 years from now. All credit and debt are handled by impartial AI algorithms.
Okay, so no human loan sharks.
No human creditors at all. If you borrow money, you're borrowing from the system. If you fail to pay, the algorithm simply cuts you off from resources.
That's called math.
Right. It turns off your electricity, locks your car, maybe restricts your food credits. And here's the key. There was no shaming, no phone calls, no collection agents, no court dates where a judge yells at you, no personal infliction of pain or humiliation. It's just a cold, indifferent switch flipping.
So we remove the festival of cruelty entirely.
Exactly. The philosophical testing here is, in this society, would the feeling of moral guilt disappear? If guilt is historically rooted in the fear of the creditor's anger, what happens when the creditor is a line of code that doesn't get angry?
That is fascinating. If Nietzsche is right, and the bad conscience is the internalization of that aggression, then removing the personal aggression should theoretically reduce the internal guilt.
You wouldn't feel sinful for going bankrupt. You'd just feel a technical error.
You'd feel inconvenienced, not guilty.
But has the bad conscience become so internalized that we would invent new spiritual debts even without economic ones?
That's the danger. If it's genetic or mimetic by now, we might invent new forms of guilt. We might feel guilty toward the algorithm.
Or what if it goes the other way? Without the release of paying off debt through suffering, would the society produce sovereign individuals or just indifferent psychopaths?
I suspect we'd see a rise in sociopathy. Without the visceral link between debt and pain, the promise loses its weight. Nietzsche said memory is burned in by pain. No pain, no memory, no promises. The social fabric might dissolve.
All right, thought experiment number 2. The resentment vaccine.
This sounds medical.
It is. Nietzsche talks about physiology a lot. He says resentment is a poisoning of the system. So imagine a neurological implant, a kind of Neuralink for the soul. It monitors your brain chemistry.
Okay.
Whenever it detects the pattern of resentment, that stewing long-term hatred, the imaginary revenge, it stimulates the brain to either force an immediate reaction or an immediate forgetting. No imaginary revenge is physiologically possible.
So you either punch the guy who insulted you or you instantly Zen master it and let it go.
Exactly. No simmering, no, we get him back one day, no building of anti-values. You are physiologically incapable of ressentiment.
That would destroy civilization as we know it.
How so?
Nietzsche suggests that civilization, deep thinking, even the soul itself comes from that internalization. If we discharged everything immediately, we'd return to being happy beasts of prey. We'd be healthy, sure, we'd be happy, but we'd be shallow.
Would art survive?
Probably not. How much art comes from suffering from longing, from unexpressed emotion? If you remove the inner world created by holding things back, you might lose the capacity for poetry, for complex philosophy.
And religion.
Religion would collapse instantly. The priestly type relies on that long simmering hatred in depth. If you remove the physiology of resentment, you remove the need for a judgment day. You remove the need for a savior.
You'd have a world of healthy, happy, perhaps slightly violent animals living entirely in the present.
It sounds like a paradise and a nightmare at the same time, which is exactly how Nietzsche describes the blonde beasts of old.
Well, that is something to mull over on your commute. If we are effectively breeding a tame animal called man, are we celebrating our own decline?
A provocative thought to end on.
Thank you for listening to Talk Treatises. Join us next time as we continue to unpack the library of human thought.